Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. I am thrilled to spend the next few minutes with you sharing some work that I have been doing on Asian American history and how we can get that more into our classrooms here in Michigan. And I want to clarify that you have full access to the Google Slides. Anything that is underlined on the slides is a hyperlink that you have access to. But you also have access to a folder that I will be showing you later on in this presentation that has multiple resources and things for you to look at to assist you in your work in this area. My name is Linda Dornbos, and I'm an assistant professor of elementary social studies at Oakland University. This is my 6th year here at Oakland, and I teach social studies methods and a social studies content course. Prior to being a professor, I was a K-8 classroom teacher for 28 years in multiple grade levels and in different contexts throughout the United States. And just a little bit about what brought me to this work. I grew up in a very white world, steeped in the master narrative that you ain't much if you ain't Dutch, and that to be a true American really meant that you were white, Christian, middle class, English speaking, a hard individual worker who can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But over the course of my career, I have really dedicated myself to thinking differently. Very influential in this work was my teaching in New Mexico for several years at a former boarding school and get a broader narrative of Indigenous people in a urban setting in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then very white suburbia. The experiences there have taught me so much. So what I want to share with you today is just part of my journey into broadening our understanding of history. This is particular about Asian American history, and my quest to bring this silenced history into the classroom. So our goals for this session is just to engage in making Asian American history more visible. Why do we do that, and how do we do that? So I want to talk about how we can embrace a sense of urgency for this work, how we can connect it to the state standards we have here in Michigan, and then using critical inquiry, the C3 framework, to design lessons. And I just also want to share resources, because I found that to be able to do this work, I definitely had to build my own teacher content knowledge because I was not taught much about Asian American history here in the US, and then also provide children and adult literature. So why should we make Asian American history more visible? And I feel a real sense of urgency in this work, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But I want to begin by just showing a video that gets us into thinking about this sense of urgency. You may have seen this YouTube video before, but I always think it's a good reminder of the work that we have in front of us. So let's watch the video.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean, before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'm Shasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Top of the morning to you. Double, Doyle in trouble. Mind you, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell. I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a crane thing.
There's so much to unpack there, but I think it does give us a sense of urgency for the work that we need to do to break down these stereotypes and many other things as we, especially in the classroom, because what we're trying to do is prepare justice-seeking democratic citizens. And to do that, we want to build in our students this sense of a consciousness raising. And this book, Teaching History for Justice, it's one that I've recently read, and it's a marvelous book talking about, yes, we need to work on this individually, but we also need to work on it collectively, because it's only through collective action will we be able to move things forward. And the first part of the book is very theoretical, but the second part gives amazing case studies of teachers doing this work in their classroom, not just about Asian American history, but about a broader sense of what history is and bringing history into the classroom for the sake of advancing justice in our country.
Hi there.
Hi.
And so thinking about why Asian American history, there's a history of racism against Asian Americans in the United States. They are often, as we saw in that YouTube just now, treated as perpetual foreigners. He just assumed that she was from somewhere else and that he's a normal American and she's a foreigner. And that they are often seen as the model minority, that they were silent and that they did not speak up against their being treated unkindly. Or even in the classrooms, that if an Asian student is in our classroom, we just assume that they're going to be good at math or good students and very studious. And we often forget, as we're teaching about Asian American history, the fact that Asian Americans are in America in the first place is because America went to Asia, and getting into all the topics of thinking about imperialism and capitalism and exploitation. And so we want to think about that danger of a single story. How do we disrupt the stereotypes that we have in our heads? And how do we uplift Asian American voices and experiences in our classrooms? And then how do we also just understand that they have a huge sense of agency, that throughout their history here in the United States, there have been multiple ways and acts of resistance and solidarity. And this image here is a mural that is now actually falling apart in Detroit, but it shows many of the people who have been hurt in Michigan because of police brutality. And we'll be talking later specifically about Vincent Chin, which his story takes place right here near Detroit. And this mural is going to be destroyed, but they have commissioned for it to be painted in a different place. And so this, if you click on this link, it tells the story of that mural. And it's fascinating to me that we don't spend more time thinking about this history in our classrooms, because Southeast Michigan has quite a large population of Asian Americans. And I just wanted to show you this fact sheet from 2020 that shows the break of the ethnic groups out of Oakland County and Wayne County and Macomb, where 48% of the AAPIs in Michigan live in these three counties. And it is the fastest growing ethnic population in Michigan and actually across the United States. And this also just has a lot of information about 78% of Asian Americans in Michigan speak a language other than English at home. And it's just a wealth of information of why we should be including this history and these voices and these people in our classrooms. And this work came right during COVID, where Asian American hate crimes were on the rise again. And if we look just at an article that came out about cities in Michigan, you'll notice that violence against Asian Americans prompts calls for vigilance in Michigan. There have been protests. Even my pre-service teachers during the time of COVID talked to me about how Asian American kids in classrooms were being called the virus and chased around and bullied on the playground and in the classrooms. So it's really that brings a huge sense of urgency to our work. And there's some other articles here too that you could look at. So how can we make Asian history more visible in our classrooms? And so we need to grow in our own practice. We need to be committed and to have this heart for bringing omitted, silenced, or marginalized voices into our classroom. And we can do that by designing these social inquiries using the state standards. And what I did was I looked through Michigan standards and I went K through 5 and I thought, where is the angle? Where's the content angle that we could use the standards to justify the work that we want to do in our classrooms? And so what I did here was created what I thought was from kindergarten through grades 5, where the standards specifically give us a window into talking about our history, our full history, and to integrate it into what we're doing. So I'm not going to read all that, but do know that that's there, and happy to talk to anybody further about those matching inquiries with those standards. And so I want to spend time thinking about the C3 framework. I love the framework because it opens up possibilities for our instruction to be more student-centered, to focus on real life problems and issues, and to incorporate multimodal teaching and learning strategies. And we can infuse justice-oriented practice as we bring this work, and really been inspired by the work of Crowley and King, who talk about not just inquiry for inquiry's sake, but inquiry for the purpose of having kids examine oppression and examine abuse, good use and bad use of power. And so what we're trying to do as we think through the inquiry arc of developing those questions and applying the disciplinary tools, and communicating those results and acting on those results, is that we're trying to develop this lens where, how have we come to see and know the world? What is my story? What are other people's stories? How have they come to see and know the world? And then how do we disrupt any harmful behaviors and values and beliefs, such as what we saw at the surface level of with that video that I opened up with? And then how do we develop ways to make the world a better place? Because I strongly believe that we're studying the past so that we can understand better the present day, and then imagine this better future and work with others to bring that better future where everyone is able to not just survive, but thrive in our pluralistic democracy. And so what we want to do is, what I will be doing is thinking about and showing you through the unit that I created, how do we ask compelling questions that critique systems of power, that use disciplinary knowledge and skills, expose students to sources that include perspectives of the oppressed, but also show those resistance and the joy in those cultures, and then develop tasks to take informed action so they can be part of speaking into that abuse of power and alleviate the injustices that they've actually explored in age-appropriate ways. That's also taken from Crowley and King. So what I did, and this was in connection with a project that I was on through the National Council of Social Studies, and they were working with a grant from the Library of Congress in seeking to break the silence and making Asian American history more visible in across our country. And so we inspired each other, and we helped each other first build our own content knowledge. We did book studies together, and then encouraged each other as we wrote more specific inquiries to fit our context. And so this is the inquiry that I wrote that could be adapted from 3rd grade through 5th grade. This specifically has 4th grade, and it is linked here that you could click on it to see the full inquiry, but it's also in the resource folder. And what I'd like to do now is just take this apart and walk with you step by step. And if you're not familiar with the C3 framework, hopefully you can see the parts as we start with this compelling question that drives the inquiry, and the supporting questions that are more factual and based as we investigate so that we can answer which is a case study of how do Asian Americans contribute to our state, and the sources that we're going to use to answer each one of those supporting questions, and then ending with answering the question, but how can we be involved in taking action once we've investigated? So I'm going to take it apart piece by piece for you now. So I do have linked here the inquiry design model so you can see it up close and personal, but we're just going to take it one step at a time. You can see that I aligned it to the 4th grade standards. Also linked it to a literacy standard where we're talking about interpreting information presented visually, orally, or quantitatively. And I always like to include in the lessons that I design a learning for justice standard. It helps me and it helps the pre-service teachers I work with think about the why. And so this was a diversity standard that students will respond to diversity by building empathy, respect, understanding, and connection. So to draw students in and invite them into this investigation, I first created had an image from the Library of Congress, and we'll do a visual thinking strategy of this particular image. Hopefully it will load soon. And here is the image where we would conduct a see, think, wonder, and look at the fact that there are 2 names on here where we have the Asian American name, but also a name given to them. And we could use that to start thinking about why is that and what's happening, and is that good or bad? How did the students feel about that? Who was the person who made them do that? So we just get kids thinking and not particularly giving the answers, just find out their prior knowledge and invite them into the inquiry. And then from there, you're going to notice that for each of these supporting questions, there's always literature included. And in fact, I wanted to alert you to the fact that I also have a shorter version of this unit that when I was working on this, I had a student who also wanted to be involved, and she was going to be student teaching the following semester. So she took this and wrote a much shorter version of it and only used children's literature just to get kids talking and to be thinking about the broader narrative of the people that are in the classroom and in our state. And so to also what could be done to invite students into this investigation is a book called The Name Jar. And for each of the books that I have included, what I've done is done a similar Google page like this, where you can see the read aloud so you can become familiar with the book. It gives ideas for how to interact with students with the book, short summary of it. And then on others, you'll notice I create a map in Asia to show the different areas, because we want to make sure that we're not lumping all Asian Americans into one category, that we're teaching that there's a huge difference with Vietnamese and Chinese and many other countries in Asia. And so once we've invited them into the investigation, then we go to supporting question 1 was, well, what drew Asian Americans to Michigan? And the sources then are a book that I will show you in a second to introduce them to the topic of the fact that there's many different cultures and people involved. And then what I did was I created a journey box for the 4 most prevalent Asian American groups in Michigan, a journey box for Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and Indians. And you could introduce that to students in many different ways. Just do one of them, do all of them, depending on what grade level. Maybe students could work on their own. It all depends. And that's the beauty of the C3 framework, is that you can customize it to fit your needs. And so to introduce students into the fact that we're going to be looking at history and what drew Asian Americans to our state, this book doesn't necessarily talk about Michigan, but it's a beautiful book that about the Hmong people and their journey to freedom, filled with beautiful artwork that they tell their story through story cloths. So you could introduce students to immigration and reasons why the different reasons, those push and pull factors that we talk about in 4th grade. Consider the experiences, the joys, and the hardships discuss the experience they faced in the homeland and in America. Here's some important vocabulary, there's a map, and there's possible questions, and also some additional resources that you could use on that book if you wanted. And then let me just show you what the journey box would look like. And I created these so that they're accessible online. But so for example, I always try to first build the historical context of this group in Asia, and then slowly bringing it to how did they come to Michigan. And so each of these primary documents or secondary documents, secondary sources, has questions to go along with it. And it could be teacher guided, it could be students doing it on their own. There's links to more information, and usually 3 or 4 questions. So here's how early Asian arrivals came into through a treaty. Then talking about, how we, many of the Chinese came through California and were working on the railroads. And then when we no longer, saying the white dominant narrative of the United States, where all of a sudden when we were done, we wanted to send them back to where they were from. And so the Chinese Exclusion Act is something definitely to look into. And whether these images would be appropriate for your age level would be totally up to you. There's other ones that are a little less graphic that you could use. And then it starts bringing the idea of how people from China landed up in Michigan, and goes into the jobs that many of the Chinese in Michigan were taking up when they arrived in Detroit and in Grand Rapids, and just some fascinating history. So that's what each of these, and the automobile industry, that was a big draw. Chinatown, that once was alive and well in Detroit, the rise and fall of it, and then a map. And so you could pick and choose, do some of those, all of those, but basically looking at how and why are Chinese in Michigan, Chinese Americans. And that is true for each of these. And so I don't think I'll go through all those, but you can definitely click on those and go through that. Then moving on to the second supporting question is, who are some of the notable Asian Americans in our state and why? And after investigating many of those, what would happen is that the class would make this visual representation. I picture something like what this mural that we see here. They create a mural just showing all the different Asian Americans and how they've contributed, things that they've done in our state. So we start with this book, Cora Cook's Pantsit. And this is to introduce students to the idea of heritage as inherited traditions, monuments, objects of culture, discuss how heritage is represented in many different ways. And once again, there's a map, some possible questions, and some more resources for teachers if you want to just use the book. And then what I have here is a way that you can involve students in investigating Asian Americans that are now active presently in the United States. You could conduct a see, think, wonder of this mural just to get kids talking about what they see, what do they think, what do they wonder, and then introduce them to the fact that they're going to be able to choose from a choice board a category and a person that they're going to wish to investigate. And they can click on the name in the choice board that I will show you in just a minute, and created just a very simple graphic organizer to capture the thoughts that they find in the documents given. And then they can design and create a visual that they're going to put on the class mural and be prepared to share. And so the choice board, and I'll make this bigger here. The choice board for each of these areas, politics, business, education, and so on, what I've done is, for example, let's click on education, is I show a person who's involved in education. And if you click on her name, for each of the people on the choice board, what I did was try to give some basic facts, a quote from the person, and then listing their contributions and any additional information that I have for that person. Another one, let's go to sports. Kids would be drawn to that, correct? And so here's one on sports, winners of the Winter Olympics in 2018. And once again, it looks very similar, where there's an image, tells about them, and it gives just their story. And so capturing their stories. And we'll look at one more, for example, politics. Active in our state, we have a state senator, the minority floor leader, Stephanie, and we have the executive board member of Rising Voices of Asian American Families, and then the Macomb County Commissioner, where once again, all of these have a link to information that I feel is accessible to 4th, 5th graders. And so now heading back to this one. So that's supporting question 2, creating that mural. And as you can see, if you would do all of this, this takes a significant amount of time. And so once again, I just want to emphasize the beauty of the C3 framework is you don't have to do all of this. And you can shorten it, you can simplify it, you can make it more, it's whatever fits. And I'm super excited because I am going to, in May, work with a 5th grade teacher, and we're going to actually teach this unit in her classroom during Asian American Heritage Month. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure there'll be some tweaking of the unit after we do it with students. Then the third supporting question is, what challenges have or do Asian Americans face in our state? And students are going to interact with the book and then some other sources that we've located, excuse me, to just interact with these and experiences and interact with the Google slide presentation that has been put together. I'll show you that in a minute. So the book, I Am American, the Wong Kim Arc Story, if you do not know, is a fascinating story of a man who was born in out on the West Coast, was completely an American, but he went to visit a family in China, and then he was not allowed back into the United States because they said he wasn't an American. And he brought this case all the way to the Supreme Court. And the court case was historically significant in that it forever changed the national conversation of who is and who isn't an American. And once again, there's several resources for you to use. And then to investigate the question, what challenges have and do, I have created another PowerPoint here, and I am going to open this up. And this is about a rally that took place during COVID, and it was after the some extremely difficult Asian American crimes. And there's a speech there by one of the persons that we just saw in the people, and so I'm not going to take time to do that right now, but you do know that it's there. And then talking about, what is a hate crime and whether this is age appropriate in your class. But a hate crime is prejudice motivated crime, which occurs when someone targets a person because of their membership or perceived membership of a certain social or racial group. And then this actually could be done through a pear deck if you have that, but then having students turn and talk to their neighbor of why did this group of people come together in Detroit? And then studying the past to understand the present, imagine a better future. There's some information here of this investigation. Through our investigation, we've been looking at why Asian groups came, but we know they also have and still do face many challenges. So we're going to take a look at 3 challenges, 3 individuals who have faced challenges in our state. Lynette Udall and Catherine Chung and Vincent Chin. And so race noticing, so we had race noticing is when one is identified as non-white, but not understood within the social and historical context, which we saw in the video that I opened up with. And so this is an interesting story of Lynette, whose mother was Japanese, father was a Russian Jew. She's an American. Some Americans lack the necessary information to see the differences between Japanese, Korean, and Chinese. Because of this lack of knowledge, many of us have to carry our cultural identity beneath our skin. This is from Lynette talking. And so what I've done here is I took her story that takes place at a school in Ann Arbor in the year 1967. And the United States at that time, historical context, is in the Cold War. And during the Cold War, Americans were afraid of the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and the threat of communist parties. Communists were often referred to as Reds for their allegiance to the Red Soviet flag. And we'll just listen to a little bit of Lynette's story. Ann Arbor, Michigan, 1967. Red China, Red China, Red China. My second grade classmates are chasing me around the playground during recess, screaming these words at me. I veer right off the playground and head home, running as fast as my feet will carry my 8-year-old body away from school. My mother is concerned about my unexpected return when I arrive home in the middle of the day. What's wrong? She asked me with worry on her face. Bending down toward me, sobbing, I explain that the kids at school are calling me Red China. I'm expecting sympathy, but instead my mother straightens up and says dismissively, "Oh, they are just ignorant. We are Japanese, not Chinese, and you are an American." And so it goes on to explain the struggle that she had with her identity and how she had to come to terms with who she was as she continued in her life. And then having students reflect on that. Why are the kids teasing her? What was her reaction? What did her mother do? And what do you see as the danger in race noticing that would like you to see happen in Lynette's classroom? And I just find this hate pyramid that is put out by the Anti-Defamation League extremely important. And if I click on here, it gives the explanation. But it helps us understand so many things that as teachers, and as students, what we're trying to do is understand the steps in the pyramid that as we go up, it just increases that. It begins with these bias attitudes of stereotyping, like we saw that seemed quite harmless in that running video, but actually, if not disrupted, can lead to acts of bias where we get the bullying, we get the ridiculing and the name calling that we see on the playground with Lynette. And if that's not interrupted, it could lead to more harmful discrimination, where we get the systemic things of economic discrimination, political, educational, housing, the criminal justice system. And if that's not interrupted, we can end up with bias-motivated violence, where we saw so much of that happening during COVID-19 and continuing. And then the worst possible scenario, if that's not interrupted, it could lead to genocide. And even thinking of the indigenous people, where there can be cultural genocide too. And so I find that hate pyramid very helpful to explain why we need to do this work and the danger of not addressing bias attitudes and acts of bias. So bias incident is a hostile expression that is motivated by another's race, color, disability, religion, national origin, or other issues of identity. And so here's another story of Catherine, who is Korean American. She grew up in Okemos. She attended a small elementary school also in Ann Arbor. She was often misunderstood by other students in her school. She was the only Korean American girl in an otherwise white class. When others asked me about coming to terms with the bullying, I now realize that my own identity was never the problem. So here's a short audio of her experience as she was playing with classmates on the playground. And you would direct students to listen to why Catherine was being teased, and she winds up being chased. I won't play it now, but a girl goes behind her and pushes her and she hits a brick wall, and she totally winds up having to have 3 different surgeries throughout her life from that injury. And it was dismissed by the school and not taken as seriously as it should have, and how she came to terms with that happening to her. So once again, have kids talk about that. There's some question starters. And then looking to the past to understand the present. We begin by seeing an example of a group of people coming together. And we talk about hate crimes. And now we're looking more recently at something that happened in 1982 with Vincent Chin. If you're not familiar with that story, it's quite gruesome, and it was really hard to find resources that are appropriate for fourth and fifth graders, because we don't want to go into the fact that Vincent Chin was the day before, he was at his bachelorette party at a bar. He was quite drunk. There was some nasty, violent interchange with a fight that occurred. He wound up getting chased and later beaten to death with a bat by two white men. And what I found was just a small little clip. And it looks like right now it's not unable to play it, but just a short little clip that explains what happened to him. And it's something that is accessible for students, that doesn't go into the horror or the yuckiness of it. But many of my pre-service teachers coming to class actually go past the Vincent Chin Memorial marker of where he was actually killed. And this is a fascinating book that just came out recently for adults, From Whisper to a Rallying Cry. It's just an intriguing story, tells the story in a very intriguing way by the reporter who was working on that story. Once again, some interaction with students to try to capture their understanding of the Vincent Chin murder. Oh, I'm not sure what's happening with my videos, and I'm really sorry. I will make sure those are corrected before, in the Google Drive. They were working when I practiced. And so listening to how these three stories we listened to earlier help us better understand why hate crimes. And this is a newscast, and it talks to like a mother who came out of the grocery store and her car had totally been keyed by, someone had walked by with their keys, and it was because they simply were Asian American and being picked on, being, as if they were responsible for the COVID virus. Once again, some interactions with students. And then connecting. Think back over our investigation so far. We've learned about Asian Americans coming to Michigan, Asian Americans who live and work and play in Michigan, and then the challenges that they have and do face in our state and across our country. And so the next step then would be how do we break that silence? How do we make that history more and content of Asian Americans more visible in our state? So before we start that final step of the investigation, they're going to meet with their small groups. The students will be put into small groups to talk about the future. They're going to consider, how does knowing the past help us better understand the present and be part of shaping a better future? What concrete things can we do to break the silence, stop the race noticing, bias-motivated silence and hate crimes, and then put down some of their thoughts and stickies into what we would call a jot lot. And so that's supporting question 3. And you can imagine that could take 2 or 3 days to go through 2 of the different stories, but fascinating stories so that students get to interact with real people with real issues. And then that brings us to the fourth supporting question: how do we better tell these Asian American stories in our state? And to draw students into this question is this story of Fred Korematsu speaking up. And this is a good way to introduce students to what people have been willing to do to fight for justice. He was Japanese, and he ran away trying to not be put into the Japanese incarceration camps. He was caught and forced to, but then he later brought it to court. He did lose that court battle, but it just is a great story of discrimination, but yet the resistance of Japanese Americans to the unconstitutional incarceration during World War II. And it tells his story in a very powerful way. And then, if possible, what could happen is that have students get into groups, create a list of possible people that they might want to invite into a panel discussion. Maybe they can reach out to some of the people that they saw on the choice board. Maybe if there's Asian Americans in the class, they could have their story told. They could bring in someone that they know and the students could capture those stories in an oral interview. Maybe there's a way that they could identify those stories through pictures or through videos, or maybe they could even have another class come and they can share what they learned. There's multiple possibilities for that. And so that brings us to the end of that unit. Once again, I want to say that that's super flexible and you can take pieces of it. You can use the books. I did want to show you the resources folder here. Here is the PowerPoint that I just took you through. But if you were looking for a shorter version, this is the one that my student wrote, Cassidy Tisler. And that is much shorter version of this unit. And she basically just went through the different books to expose students and just did a lot of interactive read alouds and was able to do it in 5 days. So I highly recommend you looking at that. Then very quickly, I have adult books that can help us. I found this Asian Americans in Michigan extremely helpful. It's all stories of different Asian Americans, and that's where I actually got those stories of Lynette and Catherine that you saw. Here's the story of Vincent Chin. This is a long book that I needed to read again, but Erica Lee, very famous historian, had a very large book about the making of Asian America, and it's fascinating to read. It just takes a while. Oh. And then here's articles and teaching resources. There's several inquiry lessons. Know that there is the spot where that group that I talked about, where we got together to write, that on the National Council of Social Studies, you don't have to be a member to get these. I think it's free to the public. There are several units, this one included, published on their site, and they are grade level bands from 3rd through 12th grade, and some other areas that you can look at. I keep going to the wrong one now, sorry. I've got too many tabs open. And there's just other places. There's an article about teaching not only about Ellis Island, but also teaching about Angel Island, since so many of the Asians came through and entered America in California, not on the East Coast. And so I'm hoping that this is just a wealth of information to get you excited about how can we break the silence and have a sense of urgency for bringing this work into our classrooms. I definitely want to thank you for this and reach out to me anytime. I love planning units. I love walking alongside teachers as they write inquiries, and would be very interested in working with you if you are interested. So thank you, and I will sign off.